So I wanted to start this off by saying that I am incredibly excited about the remake of Final Fantasy VII, because this means that I'm going to finally be able to play through the whole game. The Final Fantasy games have never really been my type of game. I'm not usually a fan of the turn-based JRPGs, and I'm really not a fan of random encounters. As a kid, whenever my parents would bring us to some family friend's house, I would always be the youngest of the group. My brother would hang out with the older kids, and they'd usually go out and adventure or pester our parents or whatever, and they'd usually leave me, as the youngest, to just hang around and play video games. I always got really excited to see what kind of new games I would discover. And this is where I found a lot of classic games. I didn't necessarily own a lot of games growing up, but I always had a lot of experience playing over other people's houses and got a good collection of games under my belt. This is also where I was able to play some of the early Final Fantasy games like 1, 2, and 6. I never really got into them. Between the turn-based combat and the slow dialogue, as a kid, it just didn't catch my interest. But there was one day, one of these family friends told me about Final Fantasy VII. I remember hearing Final Fantasy and just responded with, "Oh, okay." And he was so excited that he just had to tell me about it. So he just went on about the game for a while, and he talked this game up like it was some kind of incredible masterpiece. He started telling me about the materia system and how customizable it was, and that really started to get my attention. So after he talked it up for a long time, the day finally came when I went over to his place to check out what this Final Fantasy VII was all about. He sat me down and played with me for a little while, but then he just kind of wandered off with my brother and the other older kids. The opening scene really stood out to me as this masterpiece of state-of-the-art graphics. I was so pumped for this game after watching that. After that cutscene, the game dropped the controls into my hands and changed to that static image underneath polygon style that Final Fantasy is kind of known for. At that age, I really couldn't figure out what it was, I couldn't really put my finger on it, but there was something that felt really off. I played the game for an hour or two, gave it the benefit of the doubt, but I just couldn't do it. I got up to about where the train graveyard was, or at least that's where I remembered, and I just stopped. I just put down the controller and I just couldn't keep playing. I just was not into it. I turned off the game and went outside and played with the other kids and my brother. Since that day when I was a kid, I've tried to pick up this game over and over and over again, but I never really get very far until I just stopped playing altogether. I've had tons of friends rave over this game. I've seen the completionist series about it that really tells a great and wonderful story and how amazing this game really is and how deep it goes. And even though I'm not a fan of turn-based combat, the mechanics from what people were describing to me sounded really awesome. But every time I pick up that game, every time I go back to it, it's always the same thing. The game visually has not aged really well at all. And when I was a kid, I didn't play it young enough, I guess, to develop those nostalgia goggles to let me play through it. Very recently, I tried to pick up Final Fantasy VII again. And this time, the same thing happened. I picked it up, played for a few hours, and I just couldn't struggle through it. As much as I loved the story, as much as the characters were interesting enough to keep me going, as much as I loved the mechanics of the game, I finally was able to put my finger on what caused this problem. Looking at those polygoned characters moving across a static image background, and it kind of looks like that backdrop image is always washed over with just a wet paintbrush or something. Just looking at that imagery, the visual style of it, it actually gives me motion sickness. It makes it really difficult for me to play without getting an excruciating headache and dizziness and all kinds of unpleasantries after about an hour of play. And I really don't want to suffer through that just to get a good story that, my friends can tell me about and I can read up on Wikipedia. Not saying that the game is not as good of an experience, just I can't do it. So that was my story of why I couldn't play Final Fantasy VII as a kid and why I can't play Final Fantasy VII now. So when E3 announced that Final Fantasy VII is going to be remade with those beautiful modern graphics, I got so excited, and I am finally going to be able to experience Final Fantasy VII the way everyone else has.